happens. The earth produces the crops on its own. First the leaf blade pushes through, then the heads of wheat are formed, and finally the grain ripens. And as soon as the grain is ready, the farmer comes and harvests it with a sickle, for the harvest time has come. Parable of the mustard seed. Jesus said, "How can I describe the kingdom of God? What story should I use to illustrate it? It is like a mustard seed planted in the ground. It is the smallest of all seeds, but it becomes the largest of all garden plants. It grows long branches, and birds can make nests in its shade." I keep going?
Yes.
Summary of Jesus' parable ministry. Jesus used many similar stories and illustrations to teach the people as much as they could understand. In fact, in his public ministry, he never taught without using parables. But afterward, when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything to them. Again, still go?
34.
34? That's it.
I think that's it.
So here in Mark, we get to see kind of like Mark puts the main focus of all the parables that Jesus teaches in this section here after the time of questioning from the religious leaders. So he's not going to really focus much on parables after this. But what does these three additional stories tell you about parables, or about what are they trying to teach us?
I like the part of the first read about the lamp and all. We're supposed to take his word. We don't let it go out. We spread it to others. Witness to others, you know, by the way we live, we can help them or whatever.
Yeah. You know, probably one of my favorite illustrations is my fellow pastor here at the Pentecostal church at Christmas Eve did an amazing demonstration. He had this candle in his hands. He's like, "Now what do we do with this candle? Do we put it underneath the table? Do we put it like something, a box over it?" And he kept demonstrating like things like, no, we don't do that. We put it on the table for it to show light. We don't try to hide it or anything. This is what it's for and what we're supposed to do with it. And I thought that was an amazing image that he provided in showing that we need to be lights in this world and not hide who we are. So at the parable of the seeds growing, what does that make you think of?
Almost goes back up to what he was telling his disciples.
It happens when you do put the seeds in, the different things that happen.
Yeah,
It grows.
and you don't understand it basically, but it happens. If you have faith, it happens.
It's a small seed, and if we witness it, it fast it grows to others.
And somewhere it doesn't talk about a child like thinking in terms of how you feed a child. You start a child out on milk and soft food, and gradually he begins to take more food, and that our faith kind of works that same way. These are simple stories, and once you start to get them, you start to grow, your faith starts to grow, and it says something in here about the lamp that if you don't use it and you don't hear it and you don't understand, then you lose what understanding you did have. So it's like we hunger and thirst for our spiritual needs and our faith and our righteousness.
And the mustard seed is, I guess it's like it says in the scripture here. When we plant it, it's the largest of all plants. How it grows. We don't let it die. We know we have to take it out from our mouth. We have to spit it out and say it to others wherever we go.
He's changed it.
If we can, people accept it, everything goes.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the mustard seed is like considered like one of the smallest seeds, and how it actually grows up into a rather large bush or tree. And something that seems insignificant becomes something that's much larger than you can imagine. And then we come to verse 35 through 40, and we're going to see a transition here. Would someone be willing to read that for us?
That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to them, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
Do you think that he, because he could do miraculous things, do you think that he did this squall up just to prove something to them?
I don't think I've actually thought of it in that way, and I don't specifically think so. I know that that at that day and time, that there was like an understanding that people had that weather events could be a demonic event, like the demons could control the weather to some extent. Some even blamed like seafaring gods like Poseidon for such things, because Greek kind of culture and ideas and mythology had infiltrated that area as well. But the amazing thing, of course, is that whatever this force is, Jesus commands it to stop. And he tells it that be still.
I think he was testing her faith.
That's what I saw in that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
They
and I
said,
think
who is this man?
Yeah.
He was trying to teach them a lesson too, because they still hadn't gotten to the point that they will get to.
Well, like verse 40 says, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?"
Yeah,
Right.
faith.
Yeah, and that seems to be a theme here in Mark, is that we often think of the apostles as really being, we hold them up in esteem, but really Mark kind of gives us an account where the apostles are kind of lackluster. They're floundering in their abilities to even have faith and to follow Jesus as they're supposed to. And you're going to be watching that. And so there kind of is this theme in Mark where there's like this recognition of a lack of faith in the abilities of the disciples, who are supposed to be the closest people to Jesus. And you're going to see that continue on as we see the story of Mark. And so it's kind of like we get to see Jesus being let down by the very people he's supposed to save. And that's kind of it seems to be a theme that we see kind of play out again and again, only it grows in magnitude to some extent. And it's interesting that Mark kind of, I would say, really kind of presents the disciples in such a way, because some of the other Gospels are much more respectful of the apostles. Like Luke, for example. I think throughout most of that book, it's actually referring to them as apostles. And yet, I find it interesting that the oral tradition believes that it's actually Peter who influenced Mark to be written and how it is. And some of the thoughts is that Peter was, the way the story goes with the apostles is, it's kind of a humbling tale from Peter about how he failed. But I mean, of course the story doesn't end for him there.
Could he have been trying to show that God has control of everything? Because that's showing creation, the storm, the weather, the sea.
Mm-hmm.
So could he have been trying to show the disciples that God controls everything?
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point in showing that, because when we think of, we go back to Genesis and the creation narrative, we see that the Spirit of God is hovering over the water. And God makes form out of nothing, out of chaos. And then what we have here is Jesus is in the boat. He's sleeping on the cushion, probably by the steer, maybe in the boat, in a similar place to where Jonah was sleeping, and during that wild storm many centuries earlier. Except Jesus is doing the right thing. He knows what to tell the storm to do, and he calms the storm, and it stops. So yeah, I can see that this event in itself kind of mirrors what God was doing in creation. How out of chaos there became a peacefulness.
Are apostles and disciples considered the same?
I would say they're two different terms, and they are used in different ways. Disciple means basically student, one that is a student, and Jesus actually had many disciples. We think of Jesus actually had, I would say, by the time the book of Acts comes around, he had like 120. There's a part where it says the 70 are sent out. And then, of course, there's the 12 disciples. They're the core disciples. Now, the word apostle is basically the Greek word apostello, and that means the sent ones. And I find it interesting that a lot of the Gospels will actually intentionally, besides the headings that we see in here, won't refer to the 12 disciples as apostles until we get to Acts. And that's because that's when they're empowered. Jesus is sending them out, and they're now the sent ones going out and making disciples. In many ways, they're functioning like what we have as church planters today, going out and planting churches and making more disciples.
And that's what Paul was called all the time. The
Yes.
apostle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we come to chapter 5, and we see there's a really interesting narrative here, a story, 20 verses. Would someone be willing to read that as we...
I'll read it. They went across the lake to the region of Genevieve. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from the distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs were feeding on the nearby hillside. The demon begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave the region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell the Nicodemus how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed.
Well, so what's the story about?
I think when the legion, the demons, they were saying who he was, and he didn't want that, and so he did the least that he could do by putting him in the halls, and then he made him whole. But he was trying to get it away. He'd keep that much away, I think. By him saying that would really, I think, put him off with the rest of the people. When he comes in and says that.
I've often wondered, when the hogs drowned, did the demons drown too, or
Yeah.
did they have to find another home?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, this whole story is just kind of takes us out of our comfort zone, at least for me. And knowing that Jesus is in his main ministry is around Galilee. Well, Delapolis is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus gets out of the boat. He's on that side of in Gentile territory. So you're not going to see many Jewish people there. And he runs into this man that is demon-possessed by this host of demons that's calling themselves Legion, which is the staple military unit in that day and time for the Roman Empire. 6,000 men strong, Legion. So I don't know if the Legion just was bragging about himself and with all the host of demons in there, or if he
He was
actually...
really a multiple person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the people wanted him to leave because they'd seen it. Because they didn't like what they had done, because whoever ran her, they had lost all those pigs.
Yeah, so you had this confrontation, and that all these demons recognize who Jesus is, and Jesus is telling them to leave this man, and they felt quite at home because they've been there for a while, and they go into the pigs, which is, interestingly enough, an unclean animal according to Jewish tradition and customs. And there's 2,000 of them. They all, when the demons get into them, get into the pigs, they automatically run off a cliff. And so he gives them permission to host these demons, and yet the demons kind of take the pigs and run with them.
Kind of like Lynn, what happened to the demons?
Yeah, so, you know,
I wondered that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't tell you why the demons did what they did exactly. Maybe it's because they wanted to drive out or give Jesus a bad reputation in that area. They're like, well, we'll take the pigs and just go into the sea with them.
Mess this farmer's
Yeah.
livelihood up.
Cause some
Yeah,
havoc.
like you said, give him a bad reputation.
Yeah, and then because the people, when they saw what happened with the pigs, they wanted nothing to do with Jesus because
Yeah.
their livelihood has just been devastated. And they're like, no, 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 you need to leave. You need to go back to the other side of the sea.
Get back in your boat.
But I think what's I find amazing is that there's one man here who was a demon-possessed man formerly. He gets up and he basically says to Jesus, I want to follow you. I want to go with you. And Jesus is like, no, it's not your time to come and join me. You stay here and you deliver the message. So, this reminds me of actually the president of my seminary delivered a sermon saying there was this one man that studied intensely a language in another continent. He was pursuing diligently how to translate the gospel. And after, we're talking a long time of work, he actually finally was able to know that language well enough to preach in it. And the first time he entered into a place of worship to preach the gospel, one person showed up. And that was the first time the gospel was ever spoken in that language, supposedly. So Jesus did all of this for one person.
And he told at the end, he told him, he said, go and tell the people and show and tell how he's had mercy on him.
Yeah.
You know what he did for him.
So this man who was formerly a demon-possessed man ends up being an evangelist for Jesus in Delapolis. So the story doesn't end with him.
That's under the rapture form.
Oh, so this forum, they're certain that the demons didn't drown with the pigs. I'm pretty certain too, because to my understanding, fallen angels or angelic beings are spiritual rather than visible. And since they had the power to enter into a man and then go into the pigs, they'll probably go out there and cause more havoc.
Somewhere else, yeah.
There's extra other ones.
And I know in my own work, I never search out demons, but they'll show up when they want to. But what you do when you see one is you send them to Jesus. Tell them to go to the feet of the cross. And
Hopefully we'll see him.
yes, you know, we've had plenty of work to do otherwise.
I reckon you'll know, won't you?